Chapter 2. I held the little man who had shot arrows at me and felt his 5 friends moving in my pocket. I took the knife and moved it towards the man in my hand. He looked very frightened. But his fright turned to surprise when I used the knife to cut the strings that had tied his hands together. "Off you go," I said to him as I put him down on the ground. "Your king wants to keep me tied up, but I don't mind if you're free." Then I took his friends from my pocket and put them down next to the first man. "You can all go, too," I told them, and I laughed when they all quickly ran away, shouting loudly. I later found out that the guards had told the king about my kindness to the people who had tried to hurt me, and I think this helped my situation. The king decided to make me a bed. He asked workmen to fit together 600 of their beds to make one which I could sleep on, and my nights became more comfortable. During the next few weeks, people came from all over the land to see me. The king became worried because some of the villages were now so empty that there were not enough people to work in the fields. So he made a new law saying that no one could see me without a license, which people had to pay for. I later discovered that the king had other worries about me. He had many meetings with his advisors to ask them what would happen if I escaped. The advisors were also worried because I needed so much food and drink and they were not sure if they could afford to keep me. As a result, it was decided that all the people living near the city should supply 60 cows, 40 sheep, bread and fruit every morning to help feed me. The king said that another 600 people would be paid to look after me and that they could live in tents close to my home. Another 300 people would be employed to make my clothes, and 6 of the king's best advisors would become my teachers, helping me to learn their language. I have always been good with languages, and within about 3 weeks, I had already begun to speak their language quite well. The king often visited me and was pleased to talk to me and to help me learn more. When I realized that the king could understand me, I was very pleased to talk to him and tell him my thoughts. "Your Highness, you know that I won't hurt your people, so please, can you set me free?" I asked him one day outside my home. "I can see that you're not a violent man, but this will take time and you need to be patient," he explained. "First of all, you must allow 2 of my soldiers to search your clothes for any weapons that could be a danger to us." "I'm happy to be searched," I told him. "Good," continued the king. "Whatever we find in your pockets, we'll keep, but I promise we'll return your things to you when you leave our country, or we'll pay for whatever we do not return." "Very well," I said. The king then called over 2 of his soldiers and asked them to search me. I picked them up and put them first in my coat pockets and then in my other pockets. The soldiers noted down everything they saw: a handkerchief, a letter to my wife, a comb, a watch, a wallet, 2 guns and my sword. These were ordinary things that any traveler would carry, but to these little men they seemed amazing. They showed the list to the king. He seemed pleased, although he did not realize that the soldiers had not found a pair of glasses and some other things that I had kept in a secret pocket. When the king read that I had a sword and some guns, he asked me to show them to him. However, as soon as I picked up my sword, the king's men were shocked by its size and cried out in surprise. "Your sword looks extremely dangerous," said the king bravely. "Please put it down on the ground." This I did, before I showed him my 2 guns. "What are these strange things?" he asked. "I'll show you, but please, don't be worried," I said. "They'll make a very loud noise." I fired both guns into the air. The noise made his soldiers fall onto the ground in fear, and even the brave king looked very nervous. I then put the guns on the ground next to my sword. "Here are my guns, but please be very careful with them." Finally I showed him my watch, which puzzled the king greatly. "What's this strange machine for?" he asked, "and why does it make that continuous noise?" I tried to explain that it was used to measure time. The king asked his soldiers to take these things back to his palace where his experts could examine them. The king's people now understood that I was not a dangerous person, and those who came to see me were no longer afraid of me. Sometimes I lay down and let 5 or 6 people climb up to dance in my hand. Children played games around me too. I began to hope that soon I would be set free and did everything I could to please the king. This seemed to be successful, as the king soon invited me to some important events. First, I was invited to watch some of the country's best athletes. 2 men held the ends of a long pole and the athletes took turns to jump over the pole. After each successful jump, the pole was raised higher and higher. The person who jumped the highest was given a blue-colored ribbon by the king, the person who was second got a red ribbon, and the person who was third got a green ribbon. The winners were very proud of these ribbons, and I sometimes saw the athletes wearing them pinned to their ordinary clothes as they walked around the city. When I stood up, the king said my legs were taller than the highest gate in the city. So on another day, he ordered 3,000 of his soldiers to ride their horses in a line between my legs while I stood without moving, to show me how big his army was. Then the king wanted his soldiers to show me what expert riders they were, too. He asked me to hold out my arm a few centimeters from the ground, and the soldiers took it in turns to jump over it. The people watching loved this and everyone clapped. I had now asked the king almost every day if I could be unchained. However, the king had one advisor called Gulliver who neither liked nor trusted me, and he did all he could to stop me from being free. When the king's other advisors suggested that my freedom was possible, Gulliver only agreed if I made a number of promises. These promises he read out to me in an important voice. "You must promise not to enter the city unless you are asked, and if you do enter, we must warn the people that you are coming for their own safety. You must promise not to step on any of the people of Lillibert or pick them up without their permission. You must walk along roads and not lie down in any fields in case you damage our crops. You must agree not to leave the country without a license. Finally, you must promise to fight for the king if there is ever a war with Blefuscu, the country next to ours." I agreed to all of this happily, and so the chains around my legs were finally unlocked. I was free at last. When I next saw the king, I bowed down to him. "Your Highness, I want to thank you for removing my chains," I said. "You're welcome," replied the king. "I'm sure you'll be a useful servant to me and prove that I've been right to help feed you and give you clothes." "I promise I'll do my best to please you," I said, "but perhaps you can also do something for me. Can I visit your great capital city, Meldendo?" "Yes, I can allow this," said the king, "but you must be very careful not to damage any of the buildings or hurt any of the people." After I had agreed to his demands, the king asked his men to put up a notice warning the people about my visit and told them all to stay indoors. I stepped over the western gate into the city and walked slowly down the main city street. I needed to be careful that my coat did not damage the roofs of the small houses, which all had 4 or 5 floors. It was a busy, crowded city with many shops and little markets, and in the center of the city stood one of its largest buildings, the king's palace. I stepped over the wall around the palace into a big open square to look at the beautiful building, which stood almost 2 meters high. The king wanted me to see inside, but I could not climb over the palace walls into a central square without damaging them, and the windows in this part of the palace were too small to see inside. So I visited the king's park, which was nearby, and cut down some of the largest trees I could find. I used a knife to make the trees into 2 wooden stools. These I carried back to the palace. I stood on one of them and passed the other over the roof of the palace. I was now able to step over the palace without damaging any walls, and I was now inside the small central square. Now I could lie down and look inside the larger windows of the palace and see the king's rooms. I was very pleased to see the beautiful furniture and the king's servants at work. The queen was also there, and she waved at me with a smile. About 2 weeks after I had explored the capital city, I was visited by Reldressel, an important official who worked for the king. "I have something important to tell you," he said. "Very well," I answered. "Would you like me to lie down so you can speak to me more easily? Perhaps it would be easier if I stood in your hand instead?" he suggested. So I picked him up and he began to tell me the latest news. "We are all pleased that you are now free, but you must understand that this is only because of the difficult situation in Lillibut," he said. "You see, there are 2 problems in our country at this time. The first problem is inside the country. There has been a great argument between the 2 main political groups. One group, the Tramaxan, believe that people should wear high heels on their shoes because this is the country's tradition. The other group, the Slamaxan, believe that you should wear low heels because this is more modern. The king wants to wear low heels and has told all his men to do the same, although his son the prince likes to wear high heels." "So what has happened?" I asked. "Well, now the 2 political groups refuse to talk to each other," he said. "There are more people in the Tramaxan group, but the king's group, the Slamaxan, is more powerful." "I see," I said. "The other problems outside the country," Reldressel continued. "The king's worried that Lillibut will be attacked by our enemies from Blefuscu. This island's nearly as large and as powerful as Lillibut, and the countries have been fighting each other for many years." He then explained how the war had begun. "The traditional way to break an egg before you eat it in Lillibut is to break it at the larger end. However, the king's grandfather, when he was a boy, cut his finger when opening an egg in this way. So he introduced a law that said that everyone should break their eggs at the smaller end. People who opened an egg at the larger end would be punished." "Of course," I said, thinking to myself that this sounded ridiculous. "This rule was not at all popular," he continued, "and there were many rebellions because of it. The rebellions were never successful, and the people who took part in them always ran away to Blefuscu, where they were welcomed as friends. Because of this, a war began between the 2 countries. Lillibert has lost at least 40 ships and around 30,000 soldiers. Although Blefuscu has lost a similar number of people, it seems likely that they are planning to attack Lillibert any day soon. That's not good news, I said. For this reason, the king has asked me to tell you about our problem, because he wants you to help us. I understand, I said. Well, I'm certainly ready to help to defend your country from any coming attack. Good, said Reldresel. I'm very pleased to hear this. I'll inform the king at once. When he had left, I sat down and thought about what I had promised. Had I done the right thing? I did not want to hurt anyone, but it seemed the time for fighting was near.